There were two organizations they both mentioned entrepreneurial, but both had a very different definition what entrepreneurship is. And so even though they stood by it, one was really quick at doing processes. And the other one actually took their time and spent more time on research and development. And so even though they say they are aligned in that sense, and then on top of that, you look at the financials, you say, oh, great, right? Let's go through with it. And then this happens because the definition was so different.
Welcome to the RolyPoly, where we talk to people building, buying, and fixing companies in the roll-up world. I'm Dylan Harrocks, and today I'm joined by Simone Vascotto, founder of Humanaq. Simone is building something I think a lot of acquirers need, but don't know exists yet. AI-powered cultural due diligence. 87% of deal failures are attributed to culture. Not financials, not operations, culture. In this conversation, we dig into why that number is so high, what invisible culture actually means, the stuff you can't see in a deck, and how acquirers can spot the warning signs before they sign. Simone also shares a story about a tea tray that nearly caused a mutiny. You'll want to hear that one. Let's get into it. Simone, thank you very much for joining the podcast today. How are you doing? Did you survive the Barcelona windstorm we had yesterday?
Alive and well, but yes, I've never seen such a wind in my life ever. I'm from Trieste, Italy, and we have a wind that also reaches 100 kilometers an hour. It's called Bora, but it's been quite crazy.
Yeah, honestly, I woke up in the morning yesterday, walked out to the street, and I just see trees everywhere, trash everywhere. I wasn't able to rent my bike to go to work. I was like, what is happening? Am I in the apocalypse?
I never rent bikes. I don't have that experience, but everything was a bit all over the place. Absolutely.
I want to get straight into this. And the one question that's been burning my mind is, why did you choose to build an AI for the people side of M&A? What made you get interested into this field?
Yeah, sure. It's funny because when I talk about the people side, the human side, or the culture side, it's not talked about often. And so people will have really weird reactions like, what are you talking about, right? It always gets mentioned but never acted upon. But I'll take a step back before I jump into that as to how I got here. And that is, I had a marketplace for small cap successions in the Netherlands. That's where I first started this journey. And that started because I had witnessed a succession when I was a young boy. So with this marketplace, we aim to matchmake buyers and sellers with soft factors. The issue there was that the buy side was not interested enough to input those soft factors to really get the whole algorithm to work. And so they would bypass the platform and ask for buy side advisory. So we did that for about 10 months until we realized that the product market fit was not there because of this reason. And I took a step back, the team dissolved, and from a bunch of research, I'd realized that it's not about the matchmaking. That's what the market is looking for. It's about the people, the culture. Now, culture gets tossed around a lot. It's what it is, what it isn't. But when you look at the people, it's the people that, especially during integrations, are the issue. So most acquisitions, usually 70 to 90%, fail to reach their strategic or financial objectives. And so having done that research, and let's say about 70% of the M&A network I had reached out to said, we're looking for such a solution, I had enough conviction to then jump into such a direction and say, well, there's not many other solutions out here that kind of look at this process other than interviews and surveys that tend to be a generic approach for large cap deals because you have two constraints, the time and the budget. And so with that, I started this journey. And I've been partnered now with an American company, software-based, for about 5 months. And we're the first ones in Europe to really approach it this way. We call it cultural due diligence, right? So we measure behavior and turn it into execution risk to determine what's the affinity between two organizations. And if I can dive deeper into this as to why I like it so much is M&A has shifted, radically. I've been in this space for, closing in on 2 years now. So I'm not going to pretend I know everything, but what I can tell you is at the beginning, M&A, 20th century was to essentially get pricing power and for, market control. That's when M&A had really started. So you'd see acquisitions primarily in the US with really big players. But at the time, you'd know plus or minus what the business model was, right? You'd know if there's another railroad company, plus or minus, you know what they're doing. Nowadays, it's almost like that model hasn't shifted over the years, because as the process formalized and banks jumped in to help through the process, the buy side was kind of left out because the buyer would have to catch up to the seller's demands, right? So that the speed of the deal was also moved super quickly. And the buyer is not, to this day, really able to kind of ask the right questions, or, because of the time frame they put in, the pressure. And so what's that led to is the acquisitions used to be quite simple. But then what we're moving now into is, AI, different processes, different systems, people, culture, all these things that were at the beginning weren't as maybe necessary, but now to reach your objective in the final deal thesis, you need, right? You need to consider, because the deals that we do are so different. And so the model has to shift. And I believe this year, 2026, is one of the main years that this will happen, because now we're looking at value creation, not so much just about on paper, what looks great, what might work. It's also about, will the people work well together? What's the execution style? So all these things have added up and kind of are moving towards this direction. That, at least that's what I see. And that's why I'm positioning this way, to look at this other factor. When we say, well, behavior is a very important factor, we don't remain on the surface of culture. Let's dive deep into it. Show me where the money is, right? That everybody wants to know that. What's the ROI of looking into this? And then we move forth. So that's kind of, in more than one sentence, how I got into it, and the interest and what I'm seeing here.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So in your family, you saw that succession happen. So you've always had a bit of an interest in M&A. As you were doing M&A research, you saw that a huge part of deals fail, and a huge part of that reason is because of culture. And then you mentioned now that you feel like things are changing, comparing it to the 20th century. Why do you think it's changing? Why do you think culture is more important now than it was, say, 50 years ago?
Well, as I said, the systems are changing. Just think about, you have corporate buying a startup. That was never the case perhaps years ago. And so the processes and systems are completely different. And you have to pose a question, what made that startup valuable in the first place, right? What made them get acquired? And let's not remove that element, because if you do, then the whole process might fall apart, right? I remember there was this one acquisition in the medical space in the US, and a really large corporate had bought this scale up, let's call it, and the whole point of that scale up is that they were able to they were fast. Their processes were quick. But once they had merged and they were bought, essentially their value proposition, the speed, dissipated, because within the corporate, they had a completely different process that they had to follow, right? And so that's what you're seeing is that, if you're able to determine what these hiccups may be beforehand, in terms of processes, people, execution, then you can determine, okay, well, perhaps this acquisition doesn't stand with what we're looking to achieve now, strategically or financially, right? As I said, almost 70 to 90%, depends on what research you're citing, of these acquisitions don't achieve those goals. So it's a bit funny, you have to do something about it. What are the solutions? What are people doing? So then that's when you start to see integration offices come into place, right? And all these other value creation strategic players or professionals that are now looking into what's possible. How do we inject something here, or how do we look at this in a way that it makes sense and we can see a return within 1 or 2 years.
Okay, so correct me if I'm wrong here, but what you're saying is that, back in the day, 50 years, 100 years ago, any acquisition that was done, you're usually buying the processes between one company and another is very similar. But nowadays, there's so much variance between one company and another with how they do the day-to-day work, the operations, the fulfillment. And so for that reason, because there's these different methodologies of how to run a company, some are more agile, some, more systemized, waterfall, project management. There's all these different things that change an employee's day to day, that now, because of that, the culture shifts and the changes in the acquisition and when trying to integrate them can make a huge difference. Is that right?
That's correct. Indeed. It's the type of deals that are being done, new elements that have to be considered given the nature of businesses, technology, processes, as I said, And this kind of shifts what you're acquiring. Mind you, this whole thing is important if people are part of the asset. If people are not part of the asset and you simply want everything else, well, then I'll tell you very frankly, cultural due diligence, you may as well disregard it, because we're looking at the people. Can they execute? Will they, first of all, remain within the company after you acquire it, right? So you don't have talent loss. And number two is, will they like it, and will they keep doing what you're doing? Right. So that's when it's important to, if you understand the behaviors and execution, how do you communicate that with the new company you just acquired? How do you keep them on? Right. So these are all the things that if you get a glimpse, perhaps also during diligence, usually around the LOI stage, depends on the sensitivity of the process and the deal, you get a glimpse as to what you're dealing with. And with that glimpse, then it can help integrate later. It can help navigate that decision. And on that, I will add a note, and that is, this is not replacing any gut feeling, right? I find gut feelings like a sixth sense that are fabulous, right? You start to pick up things from multiple deals that you may do. I don't have it, right? I don't have it yet myself, but I can tell with other people that they can immediately pick something out and say, this will lead to this and this and this. It's like, okay. What I'm saying here is, this essentially is it helps navigate or perhaps validate some of those feelings that you may get, that you acquired over time. So that's the way we're looking at it.
Okay, yeah, it's adding a data layer to your gut feeling. So I think you mentioned something really interesting there. You said that cultural due diligence only matters if people are part of the asset. So could you dive into when cultural due diligence is important and when maybe you don't need to care about it so much, and also maybe how much you should care about it? Maybe if you're doing a very small acquisition, is it less important or more important?
Fantastic question that does not get asked often. I would say it's okay. So every acquisition has some level of involvement with culture, right? And it's not so much to what extent, it's more like, what's the type of culture that you're dealing with within that acquisition? What I mean by that is, when you have smaller acquisitions, you will want to retain as much talent as possible. Because if you buy, for instance, search funds, I believe you and I had mentioned them during our last conversation. I've been speaking with some search funds, and if they acquire, because of the nature of the acquisition, they're not going to buy humongous businesses, right? And so they need to retain as much talent as possible with that acquisition. And the current process, or the current trend, if you will, what I'm seeing is, for search funds, is to find this legacy business that's been around for quite some time, steady cash flow, and see what processes can be automated. But what if the current knowledge and talent that's there is not open to new systems and processes and AI and automation, right? So that's an example of a smaller acquisition. When it comes to larger acquisitions, well, the more data you have, the more knowledge you have. So number one, you can have a baseline where you can, even though you may tell me, we know what the culture is, data always tells a different story, right? So you're able to go really granular in that direction. Number two, well, this is a much faster process, because you're looking at the solution other than this is interviews and surveys. And by no means, that doesn't mean that they should be erased or removed. What I'm saying is, instead of 1 month and the invasiveness that interviews and surveys bring, now you are able to do it within a week, maximum, 10 days, and get a holistic perspective of the management or, board and whoever you're looking to include. The gut feeling, you're able to get for, I believe, 5 people that you speak with. What about the 100 people behind them, right? So that's also limited. And in this way, it's an uninvasive way to kind of do this, even when things may be a little bit more sensitive.
Okay, so now you're describing how Humanaq works within the cultural DD phase. I realize we've actually gone quite far within this podcast without even speaking about Humanaq. So could you tell our audience what Humanaq does and why you think it's important for acquirers to consider using Humanaq?
No, sure. I will say, before I describe what Humanaq is what I've been saying obviously touches upon what we do, but that's the direction where I believe cultural due diligence is going down. That's the path it's following. I've spoken with some, let's say, indirect competition or upcoming competition. And that's kind of the direction that we're looking at, trying to highlight those factors. What Humanaq is...
Sorry, could I, before you go into Humanaq, I just want to touch on that. When you say the direction that the things are going, you mean you're seeing a trend within the M&A world of cultural due diligence no longer being boring, long surveys that everyone has to fill in. It's a new approach, which is what exactly?
Correct. So surveys, frankly, I think everybody can say that nobody wants to do surveys on a Likert or Likert scale, however you call it. And, you get 50 questions and it's constant. It's a bit of a pain. Because of, as I said, the nature of the acquisition where you have small budget, which means that interviews and surveys usually are done for large acquisitions, large cap acquisitions, because that's where the budget is. Smaller acquisitions would not consider culture when it's also very important for them. So that's number one, the constraint number one. That opens up culture to new acquisitions and larger bandwidth of acquisitions. And number two is the speed, right? If it takes you a month and you have to get a third party to interview everyone, it feels so invasive and so slow that obviously you don't want to, have this whole process happening, especially when you have so many other things to worry about, right? So I get that. But what's happening now is that you want to reduce that time frame to just get an understanding as what am I dealing with here? What's happening, right? And that's when you translate behavior into execution. And I keep saying that, and there's one reason. Because when you do surveys, again, nothing against them, but they tend to measure emotion, right? And emotion, it's like a personality test. What do I do with that? It's a bit hard. Behavior fluctuates less frequently than emotion. And then it's easier to look at how this translates tangibly on paper, right? Well, how does this relate to what we're doing on the business? So that's what I'm seeing, and that's the approach. That's why I look at it like a blood test. That's how I tell people. It's not so much just, my cholesterol's high and that's it. What do I do? You need to have an input from somebody. And that's kind of the direction it's going, to benchmark and gather all this data to then say, this is what you can do with it, rather than, remaining on the surface as to, okay, we'll do survey. The vibes are great. The people are happy. Okay, nice. Maybe we can use that in some report. That's about it.
I see, yeah. And tell us then, what does Humanaq do?
Right. Well, we focus on cultural due diligence, right? So it's an aggregate of what I've been speaking about up until now, where we focus on behavior. Specifically, we look at 24 different workplace or traits behaviors. And with that, we're able to get a holistic understanding of the organization. How are things done? How are decisions being made? Perhaps what's the speed of decision making? What about conflict and escalation? How is that dealt, right? So these are all things that we're able to surface to then determine whether there could be risk or with another organization, or also positive elements that you want to retain, you want to keep. When you acquire a company, whether it's a merger or an acquisition, I believe that no matter what, you still have to merge the two cultures, the two processes. You can't keep them apart. I have heard of acquisitions where you quite literally, they kept that company's business in that one separate building. Friction. There's constant friction otherwise, right? Like of integrations that took 2 years because the people and the systems simply were not aligned. And so that's what we try and uncover. By uncovering this, you are able to get the 100-day plan and continue from there, monitor how culture shifts along, the course of, let's say, usually 100 to 120 days, and then go on from there, right?
Okay. And so how does the engagement look like? How do you provide that service? Yeah,
sure. As quick as possible. That's one of the things I always aim to do, because, the deal process, I've seen it. And that entails simply a link within an email. When you open it, it's 5 questions, open-ended, with the free text response. And this text response gets analyzed by an NLP, so proprietary natural language processing model that has been developed over the course of 12 years. That's what we do. And this model has been passed by really large corporations and passed on to my partner in the US, who now have acquired this technology, and we're able to leverage it through Humanaq and M&A for the first time, for mergers, for private equity, for, as I said, family offices is something that is a bit different, but that there is interest there for their portfolio potential acquisitions similar to private equity, and for understanding internal dynamics and whether or not a third party would fit well with the family itself. Now we're leaving the topic there a little bit, but that's to give you an understanding as to where Humanaq is currently touching and what we're able to do with understanding culture.
Okay. So I want to recap that. Your process is basically you email. Is it every employee or just the leadership team, key stakeholders? Who gets this email with the 5 questions?
As I said earlier, it's speed is a focus, but what's something that good that we can use is we don't have to have hundreds and thousands of employees involved. What's nice is that you can quite literally have 10 people, or top 5 people. That's also enough to determine, based on almost 5 million data points that we have, and benchmark on those, draw conclusions of those. That's enough already to kind of determine what's happening between management. Obviously, if you want more levels of management and frontliners, you can include them. It also depends how sensitive it is and whether you don't want to expose too much to all employees that there may be an acquisition happening. But so we don't require hundreds and hundreds of participants.
I see. So there's no hard rule. It kind of depends on a case-by-case basis. But a subset of the company will receive these emails that have 5 questions, and then you have this proprietary, basically AI, that processes the answers to that. And you've been able to build this with your partner. I believe it's MiliMatch, right?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, MiliMatch. They're based in Texas, US.
And then the output, what is the output of that? Are you saying where there's red flags, where the cultural fit might not, where there's risks, or what's the output?
Yeah, so I can give an example, a real example of anonymous example of a recent analysis we had done, diligence, where decision drag was the output. That's what we noticed. So what we'll do is that we'll use a scale between 0 and 1 to determine the affinity or the risk. In this case, it was 0.65, I believe, and that's right in the middle, right? So we're able to dissect and see what people lie where, right? The management or the board. And with that, then we're able to say, okay, well, what does 0.65 mean? What can we draw from that? I'm not going to just leave you there with that information. No, so what we do is, based on the behaviors that stand out, we can draw patterns. We can determine what this may lead to. And that's the beautiful thing. We're looking at patterns, not just behaviors in silos by themselves. We're looking at how do they intertwine? What do they mean? What could this lead to? In this case, it was decision drag in the middle layer. So it's revisiting constantly. What do we do with that then? Well, we were able to give a series of usually 3 actionable insights or what could be done. Again, based on the benchmarking, based on what we've seen work. In that case, it was like understanding what's being done, being very explicit with what's being done, ensuring that this is communicating the priority, and tracking the decisions over time. We don't handhold. That doesn't mean we jump in and do it for them. We were able to output this in a dashboard and a PDF that you can simply show to the CEO and say, this is what we could do, rather than going to him saying we have a 0.65. And so we're making it as actionable as possible through the dashboard and PDF. Okay,
I see. And what happens when you find a big red flag? Does a deal die? Do you tell them to walk away?
Yeah, so Humanaq is about nearing 5-6 months old. And so, it's not that we've seen plenty of deals fall apart because of this, not yet. But what I can say is that we're able to highlight influencers within the organization, or understanding, deal accelerators or the decision accelerator or cross-functional connectors, these people that can also be very, very interesting to determine how to integrate. I think this is something we covered last time, Dylan, and you were saying yourself from your experiences, perhaps you don't have to integrate everyone, right? Maybe you just look at key people that are more open to integrating. And so that's something that we're able to do as well, is to determine, well, perhaps tackle those first who may be informal influencers, and the others will follow. So this is This is something that we're able to do. But per se, we haven't seen a deal fall apart because of this. It's something that you can consider.
It sounds like the big part of the value of Humanaq isn't necessarily telling the acquirers if they should buy or not buy, but also giving them a plan and knowing this is what the cultural integration is going to look like. Here are some people that you should keep an eye out. And this is something that I propagate a lot. This is a super important point when it comes to we do IT integration post-merger, and we look for the champions, the ones that are going to learn the new technology the quickest and then be able to teach the other people around them the most. So they're the first ones that you should integrate, train, and they're going to help you out. So I really like that you've mentioned that, because I think that's really important. And on the inverse, there is these people that do not want to adopt new technology. They're frustrated that it's a new group that they're living under, or they're worried about their job, and so they create friction and they resist any change. And in those, you need to give special attention too, because one bad apple can ruin the whole setup. So you need to by flagging those people, I think it can make or break integration. I saw a stat actually that I wanted to speak to you about. I saw that 87% of deal failures are cultural. The reasons are cultural. What do you think of that stat? Why is that so high? It was mind-boggling to me.
They're cultural. Well, as I said, it's the people. People are not. We're not simple beings. We're quite complex. And so, when we're looking at that, are people aligned? It's all about, okay, we've acquired on paper. It's great. The broker is happy. He gets a piece of the pie. Everybody moves on. Now it's, how do we make it work? That's the gears we're working with. What if you think about beforehand, how do you make it work beforehand, right? So that's what we're trying to give a glimpse on. But why is it people? Well, because perhaps it's different behaviors, different, let's say you've been in the company for a set of years. You're used to doing it a certain way. All of a sudden, you have to completely switch. There's going to be friction, or you simply don't want to do that. You don't align with the new vision. You don't align. There's no perks with this whole situation happening. There's only friction for you. A new manager means you're starting from zero. So what's happening? And those are the things that are happening with the people within the organization. They don't think, oh my God, this new vision is great. You have to communicate the perks. Really, what happens immediately is what's happening. It becomes very selfish with the management and the people. It's what's going to happen with me. So that's why it's so important to communicate that immediately. What are the next steps? What's the vision? What's the goal? Why is the acquisition happening? Right? It's the people.
Yeah, communication, over communication, and then more communication. That's the lessons that we've definitely learned when it comes to integration. What are some other examples of mistakes that people make post-merger when it comes to cultural integration?
Other examples of mistakes, you say?
Yeah, because we're saying that 80% of deal failures are because of culture. What are, the communication, I think, is a fantastic point. That is something that is going to minimize that issue. Is there any other mistakes that people make when doing cultural integration?
Yeah, absolutely. The number one is assuming. When you assume something within your other organization, when you assume that they will catch on and think and just follow your new rules, when you assume that they will use the new IT systems, when you assuming as the umbrella term, I would say, right? And then it could really drop down into IT processes, intent, the intent with which you do things. So I would say that's the biggest thing, is when you assume things will kind of fall into place, which is great because, I love to be positive myself. But when you're speaking about such large organizations, or in general, just organizations, there's so many things happening that you can't just assume that and hope for the best. I would say that's what it is.
Could you give me any examples of cultural mismatch or little things that maybe, you wouldn't think would become an issue? You would assume that it doesn't matter, but then it does make a big impact. And it upsets the people.
So I'll give you two examples. I think one we covered last time, and I keep bringing it up because it's very simple. And that is, there were two organizations that they both mentioned they were entrepreneurial, right? But both had a very different definition of what entrepreneurship is, right? And so even though they stood by it, one was really quick at doing processes, and the other one actually took their time and spent more time on research and development. And so even though they say they are aligned in that sense, and then on top of that, you look at the financials, you say, great, right? Let's go through with it. And then this happens because the definition was so different, right? So then that's why data can give, again, another lens as to what's truly happening. Another example is a little bit more tangible, is the tea tray story. I wasn't part of this deal, but it was very interesting because it was an American company buying a British company. And this British company, which is the smaller one in this case, really relied on a tea tray within the office. That's what really kept everyone together. It was this tea tray that built the culture, built how people interacted, the feeling, almost a community feeling, right? But because the American company had such different approach, and they had heard about this tea tray and how much money on paper it was costing them, right? Because you're looking at on paper, you want to reduce costs, that's what you're going to look at. Let's remove it. That created a world war within the company because there was so much friction that was caused after removing that tea tray that people were almost, protesting in a way, right? It just took one step forwards and two back, if not three back, So that's a very silly story as to how, if you were to surface that, yes, perhaps on paper it looks like, okay, a lot of money is being put in that direction. But how important is it? How does that sit? So that's, again, something that it's a bit silly, but it's very interesting to note for the least.
It's a good story. As an Englishman, I agree. You cannot take the tea tray away and add some extra crumpets to it as well, then we're all happy.
That's it. That's it. Exactly.
So, one thing is kind of what you're talking about now. I think it is, at least, with the entrepreneur term being, understood differently from both sides. You talked about, and I saw a post as well on LinkedIn, invisible culture, where I think you described it in this way, that on paper, two companies might say they have the same culture or core alignment, but then there's this other layer of invisible culture, which is what the real day-to-day is like. Could you go into that a bit more?
Yeah, sure. This is great because, again, I think culture may get tossed around a lot. It's not really, you have to kind of educate on the process. It's something that you don't really talk about all the time. And so culture breaks down in two different ways, the visible and invisible. The visible perhaps is what you see quite literally, the strategies and the decks and, what gets communicated. And perhaps this is a medium with which you communicate the culture, but that's not culture. It doesn't end there. The real culture is the invisible, which is what you say. So that is how decisions are made. It's where the decisions are made. It's all about the people. It's the things that are between the lines are not written, right? And perhaps they are assumed within an organization. Even within a team within the organization might have these unwritten rules that have developed over time that are actually unconscious or subconscious, as you want to call it, right? Because you've seen it, you witnessed it, you assume it, right? And again, we're back to the umbrella term assuming, right? Because it's become the norm. And so that's what the invisible culture is, and that's what we try surface. It's not just about these are our values, this is what we follow. You can't, within the first week that I joined the company, you tell me what you believe in. I'm not going to integrate. I'm not going to really remember that, right? I'm not going to remember the whole sentence that you told me. So that's the invisible side. And that's where we try to uncover the conscious and subconscious behaviors that, again, are not explicit.
Yeah, great. I've been thinking, the Big Four, they do culture assessments all of the time. McKinsey does culture assessments. What does Humanaq do different? What's your unfair advantage compared to them?
Yeah, I mean, again, cultural due diligence is nothing new. I'm not trying to reinvent the wheel here. I'm not trying to go against the tide. What I'm saying is the way M&A is being done has to now follow a different route, as I laid out at the beginning, because of value creation and to attain the goal of that acquisition. And so, yes, cultural due diligence exists and Deloitte and McKinsey do it, but they're really large corporations, right? So the speed they require to change how they do things or to adopt a new technology is a lot longer. In this case, as a startup, Humanaq is able to kind of come in and offer this new solution that is a lot faster and offers a new lens. So what's different? Well, it's AI, right? We're in this AI bubble. Everything is AI. Humanaq doesn't really get marketed as AI centric, but we do use it. And the whole point here is that, number one, we have almost 5 million data points we can benchmark on. So this is not something that's been vibe coded by me within 2 months, and then I'm selling it as something that, you know, could make wonders, and it's nothing. So that's number one. And number two, it's been passed around. This algorithm has been passed around really, really large corporations before, and so even LinkedIn used it, right? That's how we first interacted, you and I. So that's kind of what we're working with here. And number three is the type of measurement we do, the way the algorithm works, and the data points that we look at is very, very different as I laid out with interviews and surveys. It's very different. We try to make it quick and non-invasive. I don't want to repeat that, but what I'm trying to get to is I think that's kind of where cultural due diligence, again, is shifting towards. It's a new approach. You have to consider, how do we create value out of this? What's the value creation? And so if the people are not aligned, everything crumbles. I think that's what it comes down to.
Yeah.
And that's what Humanaq does.
No, but I think what you said about the agility makes a lot of sense, especially for who I think our listeners will be. I mean, this is a second podcast. We haven't gone live yet. But I think a lot of people in the M&A space now are doing roll-ups, are serial acquirers. So they're doing 3, 4, up to 15 acquisitions in a year. And they need to scale those processes to be fast. And then if you have to do these long ass surveys that take, you know, that no one ever completes, and you keep having to follow up on them and having to repeat that for every acquisition, it just becomes a nightmare. So the agility side, I think, is really interesting. And then the AI side as well, you know, because if you're having a person manually go through every single response, then there is a lot of human failure that can happen there. And maybe it's hard to see the red thread between submission number 1 and submission number 50. You'll forget about what people have answered. So AI is probably the perfect sort of proponent to be able to find those similarities and raise risks or benefits of integrating.
That's right. Yeah.
But yeah, well, Simone, this is sort of the questions I had written down that I really wanted to ask you.
Sure.
Is there a question you think I might have missed? Something that people don't tend to ask you?
No,
Want to talk about?
No, I mean, the only thing that comes to mind, it's not so much a question. It's more, you know, especially when you do cross-border, this is something that is extremely interesting and even more important. So we work with brokers, both in sell side and buy side. And that's what I've encountered before. Because if we zoom out for a second, organizational culture is influenced by the national culture as well. And because of that, then it can get really messy, right? So that's just something else that I just wanted to mention that I think has to be considered, especially for cross-border and roll-ups, as you mentioned. The time frame that's necessary to kind of make it all work together has to be quick. And so these are elements that time and cross-border that can enhance the importance of culture that can really derail an acquisition. But no, it's been fantastic. So Dylan, I think this kind of, it's been amazing to be the second one on this podcast. So I'm very, very happy, and it's a pleasure.
I appreciate that. There's a book just finishing now, but there's a really good book called The Culture Map by Erin Meyer. And it is so interesting. It's about this cross-border, like how one culture can be so different to another. Just putting it in your perspective that while you think your culture might be a certain way or the standard, you really have to look at it on a relative lens, where one country might seem very direct, but then there's a next one next to it that's like way more direct. So you think you're direct, but then you're trying to integrate with another company in a different country. That can mean
you should speak with the Dutchies in the Netherlands. They are as direct as it gets, I believe.
Exactly.
There's no,
but I find it interesting as well, like a hierarchy. If you compare somewhere like Sweden, which is super egalitarian, where the CEO, it's all open office plan. The CEO is sitting next to you and you're working together. And then you compare somewhere like Japan, where there is certain rules there. It's extremely hierarchical. You have There's my colleague, he works at Sony, and there is this rule that you can't leave until your boss leaves. So the CEO might leave at 5 p.m. Then the next one is 5 minutes
Wow.
past 5 p.m. And if you work in this building that's 50 stories high, and then you're just waiting for your boss, you're not leaving until 10 p.m. And there's little things like that if you were to instantly change that culture by acquiring a Japanese company when you're a Swedish one, then maybe there's loss of respect. They're unsure of how to deal with things. So just being aware of those
Exactly.
changes.
I was going to say just being aware and then understanding how to navigate that is essential.
Yeah. And then one question I want to be asking every guest on here is, who do you think is one person that would be good to get on the podcast?
This is a good snowball effect you have. I am Clint Kendrick. Clint Kendrick. He does. I've written articles with him, and I've been speaking with him for quite some time. And he works with Walmart for M&A integrations. And he has his own podcast and M&A newsletter focused all around integrations and HR and the people side of things. And he's really fantastic. He's based in the US, obviously, but he will be coming to Barcelona towards October and November as he's organizing an M&A roundtable here. So you can also look forward perhaps to participating in that. But that could be an interesting person I can definitely bring this up to and see if anything's possible.
And that sounds like the perfect guest. That's a great lead. Thank you very much for that, Simone. And thank you so much for being part of this podcast. It's really great chatting to you, and I think we've learned a lot of things around culture.
Thanks, Dylan. It's been a pleasure.